Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome back to Engine25 Reviews. Today I'm here with my buddy Dr. Dan, and we're going to be talking about Robert Eggers' The Northman. It's a movie that was made almost start to finish during the pandemic, I think, which is a very cool thing. It has I just had everything up and then I put it away. Budget is listed as 70 to 90 million dollars. Which is a fair step up over Eggers' first couple of movies. And then so far the box office is 41.6. I believe that's as of Friday, I think, and we are recording on Sunday, May 1st. So how are you doing, Dan? What's going on with you?
Doing good. Still trying to wrap my head around this movie as we were talking about a minute ago. It's a wild time.
It's wild, absolutely wild. So yeah, as I said, it's directed by Robert Eggers. Previously directed two feature films. The first one was The Witch, I think in 2016, and then 2019 he came out with The Lighthouse, and they are both very unique, certainly among modern films. How did you feel about Robert Eggers movies coming into this, Dan?
So I missed The Lighthouse because that came out when I was living in Iowa, and I was like, ironically, teaching so many classes about movies that I only saw like two actual movies that whole year.
Excellent.
And sadly, that was not one of them. But I loved the Witch. I saw it one time in like the Dollar Theater in Rochester, New York.
Okay.
Like in like I think like maybe even the last week it was even playing, and it ended up being just like one of those movie going experiences where I just have very vivid memories. Like there's a lot of movies now I'm like, did I see that in the theater? I don't remember, like it just
That's
all
fair. Like, like post pandemic and everything's weird. And did
all
this happen
blurry.
last week or 10 years ago? Like,
Yeah, right. It's all like just blurry at this point. But I remember vividly kind of going to this like really old movie theater in Rochester. It was like 100 years old.
nice.
Only had one screen. Just like one of those historic theaters, and they played this film, and it was just mesmerizing because I'm a sucker for really any historical kind of like film. Like any film that's sort of dealing with the past is just sort of like just positioned right at that intersection for me of like history and art, which I really love.
Me
And I
too.
always and I'm just really blown away when somebody just deviates from the traditional kind of way of representing the past, which I think is, speaking generally, is like you make it feel like intelligible to modern audiences, and that's sort of like the standard, like
Right.
you put the dialogue in English, which this film is going to do too. But
Ultimately, you got to sell tickets. So, in order to do that, it has to be, at least on some level, digestible to, and yeah, so that's
yeah,
fair.
yeah, exactly. But what I loved about The Witch and what I love about The Northman is it kind of goes against that trend. It's The Witch. I just was so struck, and I'm still so struck by how the dialogue is basically kind of being pulled, more or less verbatim where he can.
Right, and it is in English, but it's not modern English for sure.
Or
There's a
modern English.
yeah,
It's Shakespeare's English.
exactly.
It's using words that are no longer in use. Like the grammar is kind of weird, for and he's expecting you to not really even necessarily follow or understand every intricacy or everything that's happening, which is, what you kind of have to. That's going to happen if you're sort of going to deviate from the modernized approach, and it creates this like really, just mysterious, captivating kind of atmosphere. Like you really feel more than you do with most films that you're like having an actual like encounter with the alien cultures of the past, as opposed to like Like I'm thinking of The Crucible now with Daniel Day-Lewis, which it's a great movie, great play, but it's the
It's
Salem.
very much a 20th century retelling
Yeah,
of a story that may or may not even happened anything like the way that it did.
yeah, exactly. It's like it's being rewritten completely for the issues of in the 50s McCarthyism and the Red Scare, and the movie adaptations are kind of like trying to have Daniel Day Lewis kind of sound like he would sound in, I don't know, one of the more modern films that he's been in. I'm blanking like on the movies he's done, but like I don't know, Phantom Thread, or it's not really like he's not doing his gangs in New York thing
Right.
in The Crucible. So anyway, long story short, I was completely in love with the Witch, and I found that a lot of the things I loved about the Witch are also in the Northman.
There my journey to the Witch was a little bit different than yours. I had heard very good things about it, and I stumbled on it on Amazon or something. Hey, I've heard, I was just up late one night, probably looking for something to watch. It's like, hey, I think I've heard about this. This seems interesting, and I played it, and I did not expect to be absolutely floored by it. As I had again, I had heard good things, but there sometimes that you can't always trust some of the things you hear, and it's especially with a period piece, like it's kind of, I don't want to say lo-fi, but it's definitely very low budget, and like the materials around it kind of look that way, but in a way that they're stylized to make it more interesting, despite the fact that they didn't have a lot of money to produce it. But like it's obvious, like minutes into the movie, that it's something very special, and like the really, even just to watching it by myself in the dark at home, not even in a movie theater, there's a really overwhelming tone of dread. Like even very early in the movie, there's just like it's like something's really not right, and the way they talk, and everything is like the color palette's a lot of gray, and it's just it's sonically very sparse. There is music, but it's used sparingly, and it's texturally very unlike anything that I had seen, at least certainly recently, but probably ever. And of course, Ralph Ineson and especially Anya Taylor-Joy give incredible performances in it. And it's just it's about a witch, or at least the belief that a witch exists in the woods. And there's just a hint of the supernatural, and he follows that thread in with his other movies. There's just a little bit here that may not be exactly real, or well, I don't know what to say real. It might not be exactly of the earth, and it's, I don't know. The Witch blew me away, and that was before The Lighthouse came out. Heard about The Lighthouse, like, oh, the director of The Witch, I'm all in on this. And yet again, like, minutes into The Lighthouse, it's something really special, even with choices that I would, at times might think are a little pretentious. Like if you tell me your movie's in 4:3, like my first question is why? That this in 2022, like there's no reason to do that. A black and white movie, absolutely. But yeah, the Lighthouse it's square, so that immediately sets it apart from anything released in the last 50 years. Certainly, at least anything, at least certainly anything since the HD era.
Don't forget about the good German back here.
Was that in 4:3? I don't even did.
It was like 166, so it was
Okay.
it was as close as he could get for, I don't know, 2006.
Right. And it's, you had to get like that movie really focuses in on the isolationism of it. And it's Robert Pattinson and Willem Dafoe, and they're Robert Pattinson seems to play a little bit older than he actually is. And it's like he's stuck with his old man, and they're both really like sexually repressed, and they start to hallucinate, and then maybe they're not hallucinating, maybe they actually did see a mermaid, and no, like it is tonally and texturally, again, very, very unique and very special, and even I would say unique compared to The Witch. Like they're definitely, you can definitely see, okay, I can tell how these are the same director, but like he didn't he did not make the same movie again, and that was certainly really special to me. Like, like maybe he'd find a groove and say, "This is my thing because I do this very well," and that is not what The Lighthouse is. And it's I guess it's a really pensive look into isolationism. And it's these two guys and they do the same thing every day. They live alone on this island, which is basically just they have the tower, the lighthouse, and then it's like a few rocks. And they have to keep the lamp burning, but it's foggy everywhere. Like there are no other people in the movie. So, they're in theory they're running a lighthouse so that ships can see to make to ports, but you never see the port. You never really see any other boats. It's just two guys. And it's, you can't really get better than Willem Dafoe, and Robert Pattinson is fantastic in it. And go ahead.
Oh no, having not seen this film. It just sounds like the pre-COVID movie we didn't know we needed.
You're not wrong. Like there's so many scenes in the movie that are just the two of them, like sitting at the dinner table, like they're just munching away and doing man talk, and it's like it's only lit with like a lamp, like an oil lamp on the table, and they're just they're like talking about women and they're farting and they're gross, and it's just like it's a gross movie in the best way, and it's fantastic. And then we come to Robert Eggers' third movie, The Northman. Definitely a step up budgetarily. I mentioned that early on. And it's, first of all, the trailers for this movie blew me away. It was like I figured he was working on something else, didn't really know what it was. And then, trailer comes up and it says from the director of The Witch and The Lighthouse, blah, blah, blah. And it's a friggin' Viking movie with Alexander Skarsgård. And it looks crazy. It's like, okay, so they can't. Can he top himself again? I'm not going to say that one movie's better than the other, but can he do it again? Can he make another movie that's as good as this last two? And this one's probably leans toward the most mainstream. Like there aren't any like real action scenes, for example, in The Witch or The Lighthouse. They're both very dialogue heavy. And really period focused. And this one is certainly that, but there are a number of sword fights and they're Vikings. So there's an invasion scene early on, and then there's some one-on-one sword duels, and just the way they are staged, and the way that they're filmed, and a lot of them are in single long takes, which at this point can be very tropey, but the visuals are so unique, and we'll talk about that in more detail when we move into spoilers, but I walked out of The Northman absolutely floored. Like this movie is really something special. I mentioned in the pre-show, like a lot of people throw around the words epic and visceral, like probably a lot more than they should. And this movie is visceral, and it feels like dirty, like you're in the mud with these guys, and you can feel the swords clashing, and you can feel the fire burning, like you feel the heat from the screen there's actually, okay, there's lava, there's a lava flow in the movie, and there's a scene where like their houses are burning down and such, and you feel it like in a way that is even like almost hard to describe. And it is just yet another example of Robert Eggers' incredible management of tone. That it's like I know how I want this movie to feel, and I want you to be exhausted at the end of it. And that is, he succeeds on every front, in my opinion. How do you feel about it, Dan?
Yeah, I agree with pretty much everything you just said. It was a really engrossing movie, I think, in large part because there's so much focus on the texture and the sounds and just like the material of the world, where they're living. So, you can tell that like there may have been some CGI in the movie somewhere, but for the most part
there is, and we'll point it out a little bit later. Certainly, at least one kind of comical example.
Yeah, right. So there's a little bit, but for the most part, this is a movie where, yeah, there's some action scenes, but a lot of it is really just, dudes, kind of like your description of the lighthouse. It's sort of just the people sitting around a fire, grateful that they've made it to the end of another day in this really violent, brutal world where your life is guaranteed to be dirty, nasty, brutal, and probably pretty short. And so you just have a lot of emphasis on the rituals of Viking culture, like just emphasis on what they're doing kind of in between the big moments of
Right.
raid, pillaging, and action. A lot of emphasis too on their like religion and some of their cultural beliefs. Like you get like 4 or 5, separate scenes over the course of the film where you're seeing like different rituals. And these are just, I don't know, you just don't really see historical films, dwelling on so many of these kind of little things that like don't add to the plot, but add a lot to the texture and the tone. Um,
Absolutely.
and that's not to say this movie didn't have a huge, we'll talk more about it, but like the plot was definitely very, it was very propulsive. Like, it was a film where it felt like everything kind of led kind of inevitably to the next thing. It was very like, just like one, action, must lead to this next action and so on and so forth. So to kind of balance that with such an intense emphasis on, moments of like dead time almost, I thought was really did a lot to just kind of, I don't know, trying to draw you into the film. You end up kind of really investing in the story, but also just, soaking in the atmosphere and the environment, you're just kind of like placed in the world.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
they are like a seafaring culture. It's you can taste the salt there, but I mean, yeah, I was really probably surprised at how much time they spend showing you what Vikings are doing, like outside of the stories. If
Mm-hmm.
that if that makes sense, to kind of say that, like early on in the movie, there's a scene where, well, the beginning of the film is the Omelette, the main character, his father returns from a raid, and then there's a big party. Hooray, everyone's back, we won. And then the next scene is his father, played by Ethan Hawke. They go see like the city fool, or maybe he's a religious person or something, but it's played by Willem Dafoe, and they're like this is a scene where they're kind of worshiping wolves, and this is how we got our reputation kind of thing, because we're the clan of the Raven, and that all this and that, and this little boy and Ethan Hawke crawl around on their knees acting like wolves, like, but it's done in a way that's like really honest and respectful, like they're not making fun of it that way, and that's something that Robert Eggers said at an interview recently that I saw was, like we in my films we're showing these other cultures that that don't exist today, but we're not doing it in judgmental ways. There are and not to say that we're encouraging people to become Vikings. They're they're intense and they're violent, and they wouldn't have spoken English, but the way the English is written here, feels authentic, at least as far as it can be. But we're not. The movies certainly has statements to make, but it's not judging Vikings. It's showing you like this is what their life was like, and these are the things that they believed, and take away from that what you will. But the filmmaker isn't telling you that you should feel a certain way about this. And I think that's absolutely fantastic. And it's, like, quite frankly, some of the most compelling scenes in the movie are looking into these religious beliefs, and they're, the parts of the culture that that we don't talk about on a daily basis, or that, that we didn't see in the History Channel Viking show, which isn't really all that accurate in their portrayal of how Viking culture was. It's like, so it's they're making claims that this is the most accurate and genuine portrayal of Viking culture ever put to film, and that is a quote from Robert Eggers. That is not Brandon trying to make claims. I'm not a historian. I am casually interested in the history of it, but it's the portrayal of the culture and the things that they think would be okay. And I'll hit on that in a little bit. As far as character relationships and that kind of thing, their religion, they're a violent culture and they raid and pillage and they do terrible things. But it's all just shown, it's portrayed honestly, but not, the movie isn't telling you one way or the other how you should feel about those things. It's just like, in that way, it's kind of just explaining them to you almost, in a really vivid and visually interesting way, which certainly helps. But no, yeah, I think the thing that the Northman does does the best is to just say, this is what life was like. This is what they believed. And he's not, again, Robert Eggers isn't trying to tell you how you should feel. He's just trying to tell it like it is.
Yeah, no, I agree. If anything, there's the emphasis is often on the parts of their world that are kind of like the most alien or the most other, as opposed to the stuff that is more familiar to us about the Vikings from other pop culture stuff. Like a lot of, like we were talking before we started recording about Assassin's Creed, because the most recent is the Viking one.
Yeah, Assassin's Creed Valhalla.
Yeah, and that's it's a really fun game. So no one, just to be clear, I enjoy very much, pillaging as a Viking, but that could almost be sort of like a stand-in for how Vikings are sort of represented just more generally. They've got like crazy horns on the helmets. They pillage and they raid, but it's kind of like sort of sanitized. It's like, all right, they're coming in, they're taking things, and then they're leaving. And, they talk a lot about honor and about, the warrior spirit and all this stuff. So it's like, that kind of resonates with more contemporary kind of attitudes about, strength and heroism and et cetera, et cetera. And so, you get to have a good time, pretending to be a Viking, when you're playing that game, or when you're watching like Vikings on History Channel,
Right. And, and I'm not going to say either, because I've seen the first two seasons of the Viking show, and I really enjoyed it.
Oh yeah.
And and there's certainly things to be learned. But it's also, that women are probably more prominent as characters in that show than they would have been historically, and just like, little things like that. And not to, again, not passing judgments on the show, it's with, I'm all in for, diversity on screen, but there are those choices kind of bend history, like Vikings would have historically all been like white dudes, and the women most of the time would have stayed at home.
Right. That's the thing. You're talking about, a culture that it was 1,200 years ago.
Yes. It's important. Like, no person alive really has a concept of how long ago 1,200 years was. Like not relative to, how long was yesterday? How old am I versus how long ago was 1,200 years? Like,
yeah, right. Exactly. That's like, not, in the grand scheme of things, that's not a lot of time, but like in terms of like individual lives, that's like a lot of.
How many generations pass in 1,200 years? Like, in Vikings, you mentioned yourself, like they probably wouldn't live very long. They're certainly, they're violent and they're prone to conflict, but also like medicine wasn't great. And they're traveling and they're, they're prone to injury, and any one of these things can claim a life early. That's it's just
Right, exactly. And then and their whole system of thinking about the world and their relation to it is based around these basic facts, which are of material reality that are just completely different today. So you're talking about, like, a huge gulf of time, and you're also talking about, there's not a lot of written stuff. There's the documentation around the Vikings is
they are not known for their recorded histories, which is,
oh,
and that's where a lot of the probably a lot where a lot of the broken information comes from, because a lot of the accounts of Vikings would be from other peoples who encountered them more so than Vikings themselves.
yeah. So again, I'm not a historian either, so this is all just like I read the
Yeah.
Wikipedia,
Oh,
a
me too.
couple
Yeah.
times the last few days. But right, I mean, a lot of the Viking stuff was being written down by the early kind of Christian church, which had they had an interest in portraying the Vikings as bad people because
Absolutely. Yeah.
they were of a pagan religion, and it was part of the church building process that was happening over the course of 1,000+ years in Europe. So right, so you're dealing with like a fragmentary record of events that were very, very, very long ago, and the conventional kind of approach has been to just sort of ignore all that and just or just sort of like fill it in with the more romantic kind of
Oh yeah.
familiar kind of stuff, which that's where you get like, the fantasy Vikings of like, Assassin's Creed or any other film that you could probably think of, where you're not really watching a movie about the Vikings. You're watching a movie where Vikings have been kind of used to represent other stuff that kind of feels
Yes.
like, like
More modern, more relatable.
yeah. I mean, it like looked like, it had to come up some point, but the Minnesota Vikings, it's sort of like the archetype, in some
Yeah.
way. It's like they're not Vikings, they're big burly football players, but we're calling them Vikings because the association of strength and power and like camaraderie fits with how we want football to be, you know?
And that,
Um,
that makes total sense to me. Like,
yeah,
no, yeah, absolutely. They're choosing to put on an image, whether or not, then that image it's again, yeah, we're big and strong, and we're buddies, and it's an image that a modern sports faring audience can rally behind for sure.
yeah,
But it's
exactly.
not all really representative of what Vikings actually means.
Right. And then, just to make it, the dark example, if you're out there listening and you need like a serious version of this, is the alt-right and neo-Nazis are really into Vikings too, for the same reason, because like there's elements of that.
Unfortunately, yep.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, I think the same Robert Eggers interview that you read, or one of the ones I was reading, he was talking about how like, part of the impetus for the film is almost to like reclaim some of the Viking stuff from some of the more like whitewashed, literally or figuratively, interpretations of Vikings that are out there. But like that's to take it back to what you were talking about. I mean, this is what I really found fascinating about the film, is that when it confronted these gaps of like time or a fragmentary record or like weird rituals where it's like, well, this is a religious ritual clearly, but what exactly is the purpose of the barking like dogs? Like you're kind of confronted with stuff that you can't easily kind of read,
Right.
and you're never really given kind of enough information to kind of like know definitively, oh yes, they're barking like dogs because this is a ritual related to like the hunt and the moon or whatever. Like you would get so much of that dialogue in like a lot of other films, and it's just not here. You're not given enough information to arrive at quick, uh, easy of even just like the literal stuff that's sometimes happening in the frame, not even just like what it means or whatever. It's like like literally, like I'm not totally sure what this thing that they're doing, like why are they doing it, you know?
And you know,
I love
I applaud that willingness of Eggers to not over explain, because I could
yeah,
definitely see a version of this movie and a version of The Witch where there's a lot more expository dialogue trying to, you know, trying to get a clearer, give the audience a clearer picture of what's actually happening and why. And
yeah,
he forgoes all of that and just kind of shows it to you and lets you take from it what you will. So it's
yeah, you're not allowed to, like, sometimes what these films, especially in the Hollywood tradition, will do is they'll kind of like, you know, they'll take the past and they'll airbrush all the weird stuff, you know, the weird rituals and customs that, you know, we don't do anymore, and they'll just cut that out, and they'll give you a really really likable kind of main protagonist that you can kind of identify with. Like Gladiator is coming to mind as like maybe a good kind of pair. It's another revenge story. It's another
right.
film where you're kind of allowed to sort of exist in the world of the movie for a long time. And but Gladiator, like you're always kind of identifying with Russell Crowe. You're always kind of being given like this really easy sort of like he's fighting for his family. He's fighting against the bad guy. And this one, it seems like you're getting that, but even like the way that you're kind of, you know, given access to the hero's motivations and his thinking about stuff, and you
And
know,
he
as
does not talk a lot.
he doesn't talk a lot. And when he talks, it's very like, you know, like what does he say at the beginning of the movie? It's like I have, you know, avenge father,
Avenge
save
father,
mother.
save mother, kill Fjolnir. Like that's yeah, the
Yeah, right. It's like his motivation is very like, this is my destiny. I must go and do it.
yeah.
That's kind of it, you know. It's like it's like you're like, I feel to be identifying with you because this is the Gladiator kind of format. I'm familiar with the format, but I can't just kind of like put myself in this guy's shoes. So I'm not really in this world full.
Okay, hold on. This doesn't happen often. Dan, you still with me?
Fully. I'm kind of like taking one step in, but I'm keeping it. Oh no, I'm getting
Yeah, I've got you
unstable
back. Can you hear
internet
me?
connection. Yeah, I can hear you. My internet connection was going like unstable for a minute, so
No
I don't
worries.
know.
It's all good. Yeah, yeah.
Cool.
Um now I forgot where you were. I could have told you until you came back.
We were talking about just like how it does
We
allow
mentioned
you.
how he doesn't talk a lot, and it's like this is what I'm doing because it's my fate, or this
Yeah,
is my
exactly.
destiny. Yeah,
It's like it's you can't really like he's not really a hero in the conventional way, and so that makes it kind of hard to make him your like primary entry point to the movie. You can't just be like, this is who what I would do. I would be doing the same things the hero would be doing in this scene because he's got all of my same emotions and, you know, the same logical kind of ways of figuring stuff out. This dude's kind of he's motivations are weird, you know, like they're not like we're not as invested in this like Nordic idea of destiny. And so like this sort of revenge thing that he's doing is just so rooted in like this way of thinking about your relation to the cosmos that like you and I aren't going to be like, you know, like if we're in this world, we're going to be like that guy, you know, killed my father. I'm mad, you know, and he's definitely mad, but it's just
yeah,
like madness is also framed in how it's like he can't be that mad. This is his destiny. He can only kill the guy when he's you know, when it's like the preordained time. So he can't just be simmering with rage, you know, because the gods will. It's not going to work. You know?
and it's like there's some dialogue early in the movie about like this isn't this situation, which is by the way set up in the trailer. So I'll go ahead and we'll will we? My spoiler button didn't work. There it goes. But the kind of setup for the movie is his father comes home from this big raiding party when he's a small boy, and then his uncle turns on his father and kind of takes over his little kingdom, and then the kid runs away and grows up. Amleth is his name, and he grows up into Alexander Sarsgaard, and he spends the rest of the movie trying to seek revenge on his uncle. And that's where the avenge father, save mother, kill Fjolnir thing comes from. Fjolnir is his uncle, and he kidnaps his mother, who's portrayed by Nicole Kidman, who like keeps reminding me why she is amazing. Like she's incredible in Big Little Lies, which came out in the last several years, and then this movie, it's just like she's done a lot of action movies and a lot of like kind of more mainstream fare, but every now and then she comes out with something like this, which is complete, and it's completely different than her type, and she's stunning in it, by the way. And we'll probably explain why, but yeah, this kind of idea that they're almost clashing families or like clashing little kingdoms, whatever. And it isn't that uncommon for like one to come in and eradicate another one or something like that. And it's so and Ethan Hawke says something early on, like it's my destiny to be killed by the sword. Like it's embarrassing for a man to just grow old and die or to get sick. Like it's given in their most of their religion is oratory, but like they're supposed to be killed in a fight, and then like their children are supposed to come back and avenge them. Like it's ingrained in their DNA almost. Like it's such a central core aspect to their way of life.
Mm-hmm.
And and they know that going in. It's just like his father. In fact, his father comes back from the raiding party already injured, and he's like, basically I survived this one, but the next one's coming.
Right.
Yeah. So he knows that eventually somebody's going to stab him to death, and then Amleth, it's going to be his responsibility to come and over and get vengeance on the guy that killed me. Like Amleth was taught this from a young age, and then it eventually happens, and he has to, then he has to act on it. And it's just it's another one of those things. It's ingrained into their culture, and it's their way of life. And even if it's something that we don't really understand, like we're not offered that much explanation about it. We just are kind of told very succinctly that this is the way it works, and this is his motivation for the next 2 hours.
Well, it's now that we've got spoilers out, we can just go ahead and talk about how like basically this is Hamlet. This is the
it's absolutely Hamlet. In fact, I think it's like it might be based on the story that Hamlet is based on. In fact, like.
Yeah, it's one of the many things that eventually kind of found its way into Hamlet, because Shakespeare, was just doing effectively what Robert Eggers is doing, which is like adapting these older stories and kind of reworking them.
Speaking of Shakespeare, anyone who hasn't watched The Tragedy of Macbeth on Apple TV, you should do it. All right, continue on the Northman.
Yeah, right. But his motivation is interesting in relation to the more famous kind of literary character kind of comes after him, because Hamlet, very famously spends the entire play being like, well, do I kill my uncle? Well, what does that say about me and my mom? And what's like my relationship to my dad? Do I really?
And Amleth doesn't care what people think about it. Like he doesn't care what it means. He's just out to kill the guy, and whatever comes of it. It's
right, exactly right. It's very, very deterministic, very linear, very impersonal in a weird way. It's like you're not really like none of these people really gets to kind of. It doesn't have the time or the luxury to kind of come up with an individual kind of psyche and identity. Like this is the time too where it's like mirrors don't exist, so most people don't know what they look like. Like they're not they're
That's
not
true too. That's a thing that I hadn't really thought of.
right. No, it's kind of wild. It's like you don't really have the ability to sort of conceive of yourself as an individual sovereign kind of entity, your own kind of man, so to speak, if you don't know what you look like, and you
Yeah.
can
I mean,
kind
and that makes sense. Going back to this is theoretically the most accurate portrayal of Vikings in a movie, and that went all the way through the crafts, how things are made, the costume design. The reason I bring it up at this moment is like the hair, and that is apparently the hairdressing is like the big thing that stuck out to Robert Eggers as the thing that's not that accurate, and it's because there are a few their Vikings are kind of ubiquitous in the movie, but the groups from different regions and stuff, and they wanted to kind of show them culturally just a little bit different, and they chose to do that with the hairdressing. But across the board, the hairdressing is really like utilitarian more than anything else. Like certainly none of the men are well kempt. Their hair grows, they have long hair because hair grows out, and it's not clean, and Amleth often has like this little leather headband or whatever around his head, like to keep it out of his eyes while he's fighting, basically. And all the men have long hair and beards. Some of the women are portrayed a little bit cleaner. Like the Nicole Kidman, her hair is done up very nice, and then like the Anya Taylor-Joy is like a house slave, so her appearance is a little bit more. A little bit cleaner than some of the other women, but yeah, like your note about them not really knowing what they look like is interesting to me, and that meshes really plainly with the idea that like everything about the way they dress and the way they look and the way they present themselves is more utilitarian than anything else.
Yeah, right. They're thinking of themselves as like how do we survive to the next day. There's another line I really liked from the film was like when they first see the uncle again, he's lost his kingdom that he got.
He raided this kingdom, and then he got re-raided in the amount of time, like in the however amount of time passed in between.
Yeah, now he's just kind of like living sort of on his own little like farm. You get kind of the sense that he's almost in exile. But he says to his son, it's like, you don't know if you're going to be a king one year or a slave the next. So you just have to, prepare for both. And so they're thinking of themselves as like, how do you survive, on a day-to-day basis, which is like one level of how they conceptualize themselves in relation to everyone else. But then like there's that mythic kind of level where it's like, you're an archetype. You're a version of this preordained kind of like character type that is being handed down to you from this oral tradition. Like you are the son who must avenge the father. That's a role that has always existed, will always exist. That's true because it's part of this oral tradition. That is how you understand the world. In the year 800, when you're sailing off on these long ships. And you get a real sense of all of this. Like you don't really get the sense that that he's writing these characters as if they were thinking the way we think about ourselves. Like you really get the sense. And this was in The Witch too, where he is trying as much as it's possible for anybody to do this to kind of internalize like the mindset that sort of that these people have, and kind of like finding a way to do that, and also kind of underlining how that's sort of an impossible goal. You can kind of get close but you can't fully get there, and that's just you just don't see a lot of historical films do that. Like Barry Lyndon, Gire, The Wrath of God, like those are like two of the big ones that kind of come to mind. But like these are all like, for every one of those films, there's like 10 million versions of like Gladiator, or something, where it's like very kind of rewritten for the mores and the ideas of the present. You know what I mean?
Right. And it's, Amleth in that way is a really interesting protagonist because, like I would say he's not that relatable. It's no.
No.
Yeah, he's very, very single-minded, and but it's not intended to be that way. It's not really an allegory for a lot of modern ideals like you get with a lot of other historical fiction, like you keep bringing up the Gladiator or like Downton Abbey. There's a lot of parallel themes about things that are going on in the real world and that kind of stuff.
Right.
I just bit my tongue, but yeah, it's oh man, let's move on for a second, because I really want to talk about the visuals of this movie and the cinematography and production design a little bit more thoroughly. Like, there are a number of very, very impressive one shots in this movie. One that really sticks out to me is like when we first transition to older Amleth with Alexander Skarsgård. The first shot, like the camera starts on a riverbank, and then a long ship goes by, and then another long ship goes by, and we crane across the water over the ship, and then it snap turns, and it goes up the ship, and it comes in real close on Alexander Skarsgård, but then it does a 180 turn to kind of look back, and they shoot a couple of fishermen, and then it goes like so. It's and it was apparently done all practically. They roll the crane to the water and they extend the crane out, and then two guys who you couldn't see on the boat pop up and they take the head off the crane, and then they steady cam it around, and it's so you got to be, and they have to roll the crane back in fast enough so that when you reverse the camera, the crane's invisible. So it's oh man, like how many takes does this take? And you're on water. Like I'm sure the boats are on some kind of guide, so it's relatively the same path every time, but they're still boats.
Yeah,
so how do you make sure? Oh god. And I'm just explaining it more out of being impressed by it than anything else. And I wouldn't even from an execution point of view, that's really impressive, but there are also a lot of other just like creatively stunning moments in the movie. First of all, the first shot in the whole movie is this volcano in Iceland. And it kind of like, it holds on it for a few seconds, and it kind of like sets a tone of this like seething rage that's just already building before we even know before we've met any of our characters. There's something bubbling up underneath all of this. And that volcano comes up several times, like especially in the last half or so of the movie, after Amleth has spent some time on this slave plantation working for his uncle who doesn't know who it is yet. There's a lot of, the camera will suddenly pan, and then off in the distance, you see this erupting volcano, and it's an image that comes up quite a few times, and it brought back really substantially in the final act here.
Where they're fighting naked in the lava.
Yes, and that's apparently a Viking ritual. Like it, I don't know the name of it. I'm not even going to try to pronounce it, but it is a like single combat to the death, like with completely unencumbered by armor, like is a thing that Vikings do apparently. And the line is "Meet me at the gates of hell."
Yeah, right.
And then they understand that the gates of hell are the fires of an erupting volcano. Side note: this is a moment where there was CGI used because the actors are wearing thongs or something. So yeah, so the choreography and stuff, that's all real. And then I'm not exactly sure how they lit it because they're definitely not standing in a volcano, but there's anatomically anatomically corrected CGI involved there. But yeah, so just a number of visual moments like that, like the volcano is interesting because it's repeatedly called back to, and it's just reminding you what's bubbling up right under the surface, and it's already coming out of the volcano, but it hasn't come out of Amleth yet.
Yeah, right. It's a great image. And yeah, he uses it really, really well. Kind of it's just this, foreboding presence in the background. I was also really struck by those shots that you were describing, because they just create such a, an effect that's really, really hard to put into words. I'm sure it was when he
Yeah,
was
I mean, and that's the hardest thing about so much of the imagery in this movie is like I can't describe it in a way that I think is fair to it. And that's just
yeah.
because of my own inability to articulate more than anything else. Like it's so it's so unique and it's always so powerful. But it's also like visually stunning in a way that I can't do it justice. Like you just need to see the movie.
This is really where I have radical kind of beef with so much of the
Okay.
way that TV has kind of informed cinema, like because TV is a very dialogue kind of oral medium. It's like
Oh
coming
yeah.
out of and it's there's just a propensity for underlining things with dialogue, and even the visual component is kind of like close-ups on important stuff, music, underscoring on those close-ups, etc. And that's fine. I mean, TV is great. I'm not gonna tell you don't watch TV, but what cinema can kind of do with that visual kind of emphasis that you lose when you have all of this extra dialogue explaining what this means and what this motivation is you lose that, like, that sort of that the possibility of that ethereal kind of quality. Because if you're explaining over and over again in dialogue or whatever, like what this character's motivations are, what this like volcano is doing in this particular film, you don't have that, you don't have any room for resonance, you don't have any room for like the unconscious to sort of try to make sense of what that volcano is kind of doing.
Right.
uh,
And I will say, we keep talking about how little exposition is in this movie. Like, really, the movie is really, it's really sparse from a dialogue point of view in general. And it's a real credit to the way the movie's assembled, because it's like it can make a movie drag if you don't. And I didn't feel like that at all. We're always you said it early on. Like, the movie is constantly propelling forward, even though they're not talking to you very much.
yeah, it's a
And
really,
that's a difficult line to walk. I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, it's just a really like the balancing act. Just like you can tell what's nice about Eggers, based on just the two that I've seen so far, is that you get like some writer directors, like there's different kinds of writer directors, and there's some, like, I don't know why I'm thinking about Brian De Palma right now, but like Brian De Palma is like a great example of like someone where he's writing those movies in a way that allows him to stage these like really ridiculous kind of like cinematic kind of sequences with like roving cameras and so on. Not totally unlike this film, weirdly, but you don't really get the sense that Brian De Palma is like gives a shit about like what his characters like inner lives are.
That's fair.
Except as so far as it like, or like the world of this film, except as it lets him set up these sequences. And what I like about Eggers is that he's got like a writer's, these are scripts where even if you just like take away like the filming component, I would be curious to kind of like read this script or this short story or this novella or whatever, because he's really putting a lot of time and energy into just like the construction of the plot, but also like how you get kind of settled in the world. Just like a lot of this, like there's a lot of really, really kind of careful thinking about like why this scene has to be here and why you only need this much dialogue and you don't need another line. Like you don't get the sense that it's all just about the visual construction, although certainly that's amazing when you get there. But it's like,
No, I
there's a
mean, and that was it. if it didn't have, if it would be just as interesting a film if it wasn't assembled in such a stunning way. You know that, and that's a
Right. Well, it's a very literary sensibility, but like the execution is, and these are, we're talking about like cliches that, verge on meaninglessness, but I'm gonna go for it anyway. It's, it's a very cinematic kind of execution of a very literary script, like,
yes,
and
I'd agree with that.
maybe that's where some of the sort of mystery that we're trying to like put our finger on but can't quite put our finger on is sort of coming from, is that like you're getting, this you're trying to like, you almost, I don't know, I remember thinking this about The Witch, and I thought about it about the Northman too, but you get the sense that he's really really trying hard to make a movie the way that they would have made a movie, like the way that the Puritans would have made a movie about a witch, or the way that like the Vikings would have made a movie about their own culture, which is obviously like kind of a ridiculous, impossible task. Like,
Yeah, but it's the I get what you're saying because for example, there are um moments in the film where, say, like Amleth, he does take well, does Amleth do it? There are characters who consume mushrooms at one point, but there are, Amleth has these like visions almost where there's this visual depiction of like a family tree, which is apparently a thing that exists in Viking art, and like each branch is a different generation and such, and there's a, and the camera drifts up and you see his father there, and then you see him at a young age, and then later on it does it again, and you see him as an adult, and then you see what is in theory, going to be his eventual children,
right.
and it doesn't really explain it to you. It's just showing, this is something that Amleth is experiencing in that moment, and then there's another moment where he's he's injured, and he might bleed to death. It might not go well for him, and it shows like a Valkyrie carrying him on a horse towards the gates of Valhalla, and it's just like, that's a moment. It's another moment with a stunning visual, and there's an actress there, and she's on this flying horse, and she's got this like crazy helmet on, and she screams. In fact, I think it's in the trailer for just a second. But then, at that moment, before she gets all the way there, he's revived. And so whether or not it's something that he was, consciously experiencing, it's really referential of their culture, and these are the beliefs that are built into him. And so it's absolutely, if they were to be telling the story, if, the Vikings, their religion is largely an oral tradition. And if they were telling this either as a history or something, those are bits that they would almost certainly include. Like your Amleth sees the gates of Valhalla open, but it's not his time yet, so he comes back to Earth. Like that kind of, it would probably be articulated in a more interesting way than I can do. But you're like, to say that this is a movie that the Vikings would make, that makes total sense to me after thinking about it a little bit longer.
Yeah, right. Well, it's there's, like there's not really any distinction that the film kind of makes, any obvious kind of like, this is a fantasy, this is a dream, this is a vision.
No, it's just, and I feel like we talked about this a little bit when we talked about The Green Knight, and it's just, these things that like are obviously not actually happening, or are they? Like the film doesn't make a firm choice as to whether this is a hallucination or this is legitimately supernatural. It's just, it's showing you what the character's experiencing in that moment, not making a stance as to whether or not it's real.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned The Green Knight, because that was probably the film that would pair most perfectly with this one.
I think I said it in our review, like 15 minutes into The Green Knight, I asked myself, is this an Eggers movie?
Yeah, right. Yeah, right. I remember that now. No, it's like those, it's wild that they're both like, it's weird how Hollywood always finds a way to like make two versions of the same movie.
Yeah.
It's like somebody like hears that their producer buddy is like working on this crazy, trippy, psychedelic medieval movie, and then it's like, well, shit, let's put that other one into production.
Yeah.
Can't let them beat us to it. But they both are, this is one of those rare times where it's like they're both kind of equally good, and they're equal. They're like not. They're doing enough of the same thing that it's like it's really cool, but it's they're doing. They kind of have their own agendas too. Um, but yeah, no, it's all kind of treated as if if it were equally real, but also like the stuff that's like not real is treated as if it were real, and the stuff that is definitely real is, as we were saying earlier, it's treated as if it's this like the latest version of this eternal kind of dynamic, that's
For
been
sure.
going on. There's just like there's no like easy line between reality and fantasy because it's all kind of.
I mean, and to say, that the Northman absolutely flirts with the supernatural, but in a very subtle way, kind of like The Witch did. Like he goes to see Bjork, who plays this blind seeress who is wearing an incredible costume, and it's the concise version is she tells him that in order to complete his vengeance, he has to go get this magic sword, and then he goes and fights this like dead guy to get the magic sword. And we're never told whether the sword's actually magic, and we're kind of. Amleth perceives this thing that he fights as like some kind of undead warrior, but it doesn't make a clear distinction. It just, again, it's telling it to you in a way that the tradition might tell it.
Yeah, right. That's what it is. It feels like it's trying to be an adaptation of these fragmentary kind of Icelandic stories that we've been able to sort of capture from this oral tradition. So we're capturing them through like these third party kind of sources a lot of the times that are written by the Christians who are being slaughtered by the Vikings. So they obviously were really objective sources. And
yeah.
You're trying to sort of like inhabit that mindset, and I think the power of the film is like 2 hours or so, however long it is. You get to kind of inhabit that mindset too, and it's I don't know, it always feels like such a weird feeling to be confronted with how alien the past is, just how different people's way of sort of thinking about stuff and acting, how much that's changed as the material basis of how we live and make food and all that stuff is, I just don't, I don't know, it's hard to think of another film recently where I've been thinking about these things as opposed to just like, oh, okay, what's going to happen next with the hero or whatever,
Is Amleth the hero? Is that how we would describe him?
I don't know. I mean, that's the thing is like that dude, his uncle's kind of shitty, at
His
first.
uncle, and we come to find out apparently his dad was kind of shitty too.
Yeah,
well, that's
the crazy thing, right? Like they all are, you are not allowed to really identify with Amleth, and like right at the moment where you're like, yeah, he should fuck him up. He should really like
and then and that leads to I mentioned we're talking about some of the other performances. I mentioned Nicole Kidman, and she is, Nicole Kidman's been around forever. She had been an actress for years when I was a kid. It's like my uncle and my brothers, like they always showed us 80s movies, and she's like the love interest in Days of Thunder with Tom Cruise, and she was in Batman Forever, which is a movie I loved when I was 6. So Nicole Kidman is Nicole Kidman, obviously, and she's been in some other like big budget movies lately. Like she was in she played Arthur's mother in like Aquaman.
Lucy in that movie for Amazon.
Yeah, what was it called?
Yeah, like Desi and Lucy is.
Yes, she played Lucille Ball. Yeah, yeah. Being the Ricardos.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
she, despite doing, well, she's an actress that dabbles in all kinds of things, and despite having this storied history of like big budget kind of mainstream stuff, every now and then she turns in a great performance, like she absolutely does in HBO's. Oh God, I said it earlier. What was her HBO show?
Man. Yeah, I don't know.
Big Little Lies is fantastic.
Oh, that's right. She's in.
Yes, 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 yes. And then she, we got more Nicole Kidman than I expected to. First of all, certainly in the second half of the movie, and she gives a spectacular performance, and she gives one hell of a monologue, and that's kind of like it's our biggest, probably the biggest exposition dump of the movie, if there is one anywhere. And it's, that she realizes that Omelette is actually her son who's grown up into a man. And then we find out that her father actually kind of forced himself, or no, Omelette's father actually kind of forced himself on her, which makes him kind of shitty too. And then that makes Omelette kind of question his whole motivation. But
a second,
yeah.
Then he's like, I'm going to kill you too.
Yeah. Then he's just like, there's no way this is true. And then Vikings, man.
Well, he kind of still live out his destiny. Doesn't matter if his dad sucked. He's still gotta avenge him.
It's So Nicole Kidman is stunning as his mother in this film. It's another great part for Anya Taylor-Joy, who I haven't seen a single thing or I haven't seen a single performance of hers that I haven't liked. We remember we talked about Last Night in Soho. She was great in that. She's fantastic in The Witch. This Eggers' first movie. And then The Queen's Gambit on Netflix is fantastic. So it's and then I loved seeing Ralph Ineson from The Witch and Game of Thrones and a few other things. He played the father character in The Witch. He was back in here as the ship captain at the end there. So it's. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Stacked cast.
Absolutely. And it's real mainstream folks. The Willem Dafoe is in it briefly, kind of at the beginning of the movie. And it's, I hate to say it's a surprise that we get somebody like Nicole Kidman in a movie like this, but honestly, it kind of is. And I don't even know that, this movie was greenlit 3 years ago after The Lighthouse came out. In a post-COVID world, I don't know that someone would risk $80 million on this.
Yeah. Well,
right now we don't know what theaters are going to be like for the next little while. Yeah. So it's, I'm thrilled this movie got made and the cast is stellar. Dan, I am so glad this movie got made.
Yeah, I am too. It really, it felt like a throwback to a lot of things. Obviously Viking literature is the oldest. But, more recently, it felt like a throwback to, kind of like a 70s, art house tradition. It felt like, really reminded me of Barry Lyndon and Aguirre, these arty, 70s, movies where they're going to take the past, but they're going to make it feel kind of alien,
yes.
And it's kind of a weird time. But, it also just, kind of made me nostalgic for, I don't know, 2005, maybe this is just me getting old, but I was like, oh man, if this had come out in 2005, there would have been a big marketing campaign. Everybody would have known about it.
And that's the thing we've discussed briefly on the show before about content versus cinema. And this is absolutely cinema. And it is a movie that you should experience on the big screen with big ass speakers. But to say that there is so much stuff that is produced these days, and we're bombarded with content everywhere. And it's the volume of stuff that we are constantly exposed to.
Right. It's insane.
And I agree. If the movie had come out exactly the way it is 15 years ago, like everybody would be talking about it because this movie is bonkers.
Yeah,
Like
everything that, like it's everything. It has all the elements that Gladiator and I don't know. I mean, Kingdom of Heaven didn't do well when it first came out, but that director's cut was really good and did well.
I'd agree. And I like the director's cut a lot better than the theatrical version too.
But like there was just, the 15 years ago, like a big historical film with star-studded cast and a lot of violent action. Like, I mean, God, Braveheart, is another one comes to mind. Like there's not really anything like this is a weirder, I think more intelligent, thoughtful film than like Braveheart, for example. The Braveheart's fun.
It's interesting. I'm sorry, go ahead before I
no, but so it's not like exactly the same, but it's like it just I don't know, it's just nostalgic for like intelligent, adult oriented Hollywood movies where there's not a franchise, there's an expectation that like your audience is going to consist primarily of like thinking adults or smart teenagers, so you don't have to like dumb it down. Like I just, I felt like Kingdom of Heaven was being, movies like that were made more regularly in that environment,
I'd agree. I would respond by saying I think that meant that they stood out less.
Yeah, right.
And this is even that almost sounds contradictory to what I was saying before. But like, there is when you're talking about like a Ridley Scott historical epic, like you kind of know what you're getting. Whereas True. Like even knowing Eggers' work and having seen the trailer, like I didn't know what I was getting walking into the Northman. And even, 98% of that trailer is in the first 40 minutes of the Northman, and the Northman is 2.5 hours long. So it's, like I realized about an hour in, like it's been a while since I've seen any shots that I've seen. So it's.
Yeah, right. Well, it's definitely the A24. It's definitely in the A24 kind of tradition of like weird indie movies. But $90 million, $90 million isn't like the most expensive that a movie like
this. It
is
not, but it's a lot of money to risk on a thing that's not a sure thing.
Yeah, and that's where I think that's where my nostalgia is like honing in on. Is just like, I wish that there were more producers who are going to give people like Robert Eggers or Green Knight guy, David Lowery.
Yes.
Give them like, because obviously they can do really good movies with like 20 million, with like next to nothing. But it feels like you've either got to do a really cool movie for next to nothing, or you've got to make a Marvel movie for like $400 million or something stupid. And so I want more movies.
Yes, more like, middle, like as far as, I almost said middle of the road movies, and that's not what it almost came out wrong. Like middle budget kind of things. And, and
like enough, even, but not enough, like, but also not so much you can't take risks and do weird stuff.
And the directors like Guillermo del Toro talk about exactly that all the time. It's just like if I had had more money to make Pan's Labyrinth, then Pan's Labyrinth wouldn't have gotten made. Like they would have said no. Like if they offered me more money, they would have pulled the plug. They did the same thing with his Lovecraft movie, which he's still hoping to make.
Yeah, right, exactly. Well, that's where it's just like the infrastructure just is on shaky ground, as we were saying. It's like, are these are like art movie theaters, or movie theaters where it's like, okay, we're going here because we know that this is going to be a qualitatively different experience, and for this kind of a film it needs that, blah blah blah. It's like, I don't know. That's like how stable is that going to be in 10 years? I have no idea.
Then it's a question that pains me to think about. And, and I don't even mean to hate on on Marvel movies. Like, I'm a big comic book guy. Right. I've reviewed a lot of Marvel movies on this channel, and I'm going to keep doing that. So it's, it's, I like to have a balanced diet. I like to consume a lot of different kinds of media.
Right.
And I absolutely want more movies like The Northman.
Yeah, right. So I'm eager to see what Eggers is going to do. I would be
There,
willing to say, having seen two of his films now, that like he and like Jeff Nichols and David Lowery, they're like the Steven Soderberghs of right now, where it's like
I
you're
like it.
doing a lot of weird stuff, and I like this, so I'm going to keep supporting you and
Yeah.
stuff you
Um,
do.
there are, I don't know that it was confirmed, but there are rumors that Robert Eggers is developing his Nosferatu movie, which I
That
would
would be
be
cool.
all in for. Yeah, like he was. Um, the plan was to make that one right after The Witch, and it wasn't going to work out for reasons. So they we ended up with The Lighthouse. But especially like if The Northman is successful, um, they might greenlight his take on Nosferatu, and he wants Willem Dafoe to star in it as Max Schreck or as the monster, whatever
Wait,
whichever angle he takes on it. So
wait a minute. Do you know about? Have you seen Shadow of the Vampire?
yes, it's Willem Dafoe is
Yeah,
going to play that character again. Yeah,
that's that's hilarious for a lot of on a lot of levels, because it Herzog already remade Nosferatu and famously like used some of the same sets and
right.
the as Murnau, and then so then like Shadow of the Vampire is like, well, what if it were real? What if like
What
what
if,
if like
like, I mean, yeah, what if people, because he was definitely a weird guy. So maybe, what if he was actually a vampire?
what if he was the real vampire? And then so if he can like cast Willem Dafoe and then have all of these layers of referentiality
Yeah,
while
dude.
also having it be a creepy vampire movie, like that would be really cool.
I'm all in for that. I'm really all in for whatever he makes next. But that,
Yeah.
there's a, I read some rumors that that's what he wants to do next. And
That's
if
cool.
yeah, because he was developing it, and then they ended up making The Lighthouse instead. So maybe he'll get to move ahead with it this time. But um, yeah, it's there's a lot more probably to be said about The Northman. Any closing thoughts?
No, and the only thing I can think that we didn't really talk about, probably, because it's almost too painful to talk about, but damn, there's a lot of people dying in this movie in
There are a
horrible.
lot of people die in this movie, and really in really gruesome ways.
Yeah,
You mentioned Braveheart, and it's like I said the word visceral early on, and again it's a word that gets thrown around a lot of like probably comically often, but like it's really probably the most brutal movie I've seen since like Hacksaw Ridge. And
yeah.
that's another you mentioned Braveheart. Hacksaw Ridge is another Mel Gibson movie. Um, and it's and it it's and I would like
Title?
I'm
Is it
sorry, what?
like, does it live up to its title? Because I just picture a bunch of limbs being hacked off.
I mean, kinda, yeah. Like it's a really horrifying view of war. Like the first movie's the first half of the movie or so is kind of melodramatic because it's like him joining the military and meeting his wife or whatever. And then the second half of the movie is the Battle of Okinawa, and it's horrifying. Yeah, this is probably it might be the best, in my opinion, the best movie that Mel Gibson's ever made. Like it's really it's really good. And then like
He wants to go to war.
yeah, and then I don't know, the maybe Mad Max Fury Road that just like blew everybody away with how crazy it is. Like this is somewhere in that vein. Like it's not as action oriented, obviously, but it's at like from a concept to screen point of view, it's equally or more impressive from just from an execution point of view, I think. Because they're making another Mad Max movie. Who thought that was going to be good? And look what we got. Yeah. So it's and then and the Northman it's a visual and visceral experience like that I can't even describe, and it's not exactly like anything I've ever seen before. And that, and this is why I compare it to these other really intense experiences of recent memory, like, I don't know, 2015 or so, but it's I can't recommend it enough. It's absolutely my favorite movie I've seen this year so far. And it's not, I think it's going to be a long time before we get another movie quite like this one. But yeah, like if you're a history buff, if you like cool sword fights, if you just want to see, I don't know, if you want to see people kicking some ass, or like, hey, if you like interesting visuals, this movie's full of them. The sound design is incredible, but it's also very like historically appropriate. Like you pull a sword out of a sheath and we always hear like a singing sound, and it doesn't sound, it's just, it's swords on leather don't sound like that, so it's really immersive in that regard. Like you feel like you're in the mud with Amleth, and you can, it sounds cliche, but you can feel the fire on the screen. Like you feel gross and exhausted after this movie's over. And it's like, the music's incredible, and they actually use quite a few like period instruments or period sonic techniques, as far as horns and percussion and things like that. They are instruments that either existed or something very similar to it would have existed, mixed in with a modern orchestra. And so it's just a very, somehow very authentic, incredibly authentic, but also very unique experience that, I don't know that I can describe it in a way that's fair to it.
Yeah, it's a real, I mean, just to build on what you're saying, and also at the same time provide kind of my closing remarks on the film. It's just, it's a movie that really, like we were saying earlier, a lot of things now, say this is TV or this is a movie or whatever, it kind of doesn't mean as much as it used to, because it's all content.
Yeah, I mean, TV content is so different. Like it's basically, or a lot of it is just long form films.
Yeah, right. And a lot of films feel like they're just, feel like they look exactly like TV shows, because they're all using close-ups and mediums and all that stuff. But this was a really bracing reminder that, like, seeing that cinema still exists, I guess. That like
absolutely
there are still people, if you are designing a film, where the visual track is kind of the most important, or not even the most important, but it's the one that gets primacy. It's sort of it's a filmmaker who understands it's a visual medium, that it's going to be ideally kind of experienced in the theater setting, where you don't have distractions, you're kind of locked in for a set period of time, and like designing the movie kind of around that, which is, as we've talking about, it's kind of a potentially a dying sort of art form, or an art form that's not, it's kind of under threat at the moment. And so nobody's really taking those risks, so it was just great to see, be reminded that, like, no, even if it's just guys like Robert Eggers and other like-minded people, there's still people who really are kind of standing up for like movies that are kind of using what that medium can do and are not.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I'm with you. It's hard to totally put your finger on like what makes this so captivating, but I think that's,
and it's it's
captivating.
Excuse me, like it's, having said all of that, like I think it's even more impressive because, like as we said, it's not really like that relatable a story, and it's it's hard to get on Amleth's side for a lot of reasons, and and yet, so the ending has some tragic notes to it, but it doesn't have it doesn't leave you with a big question mark. It's just, it's very, like almost to the point, but in like it's still so staggering despite its like simplicity. Like I keep saying, and you said it first, like it's almost the story that would be told in the oral tradition of the Vikings, or like, or you know, a movie the Vikings would make, you know, and it brings with that anything that would, but also leaves behind anything that tradition would, you know. So you know, it's very straightforward in that way, but it's still so stunning. Like, and that's like it's really it's simple, but it's not simple at all. You know, it's a very simple story, and it's not one that's particularly relatable, but it's told to us in such an honest and interesting way that, you know, it doesn't matter that we can't get on Omelet's side or anybody. You know, it doesn't matter that we can't really identify with any one of these characters. It's still, you know, I'm still here for the ride, and I'm still experiencing all the emotions that he's feeling.
Right. Right. No, I think you're, you know, that I would agree with pretty much all of that. You know, it's just there's just a lot of really, you know, just a lot of elements are just being set in tension just artistically. Just a lot of you know, simplicity, deceptive simplicity. But yeah, I'm just repeating what you're saying. But because yeah, it's great. You know,
I mean, it's deceptively simple. Like, you know, despite having all these fantastical things and incredible visuals and, you know, all this, the design, like the story it's using all these incredible tools to tell you is very, very simple, and it's not really, I keep saying it's not really relatable, and it's not like, it's just kind of a personal thing for this one guy that we can't, you know, it's hard to get behind him, but it's, despite all of that, it's gonna show you anyway.
yeah, right.
And that is, I think that's a great place to wrap it up. We both love the Northman. This is going to be the moment it's available on digital, I'm buying it again. I might even hit it up again in the movie theater. It's an experience in a cinema unlike I have had in a very, very long time. And I am so glad that movies like this can still be made these days. So thank you. Thanks a lot for coming on the show, Dan. And thanks everybody for watching. If you like this, hit that subscribe button down below, ring the bell. Trying to aim for one episode a week, not quite hitting it right now because I'm a Nave VTech and it's event season and things are crazy. But you should definitely see some other movies in the next couple of weeks. I'm going to do Doctor Strange. I'm going to do Top Gun. I'm going to do Jurassic World. And those are just the big ones that everybody knows about. There's probably some others in between. I would like to get in a review for Everything Everywhere All at Once if I can get out to a theater before that one's gone. But yeah, if you're still watching, thanks for hanging out, and we'll see you next time on Engine25 Reviews. Thanks, everybody.